This is Rule 17, and this week we're looking at if there's no value, then why do it? If you think back on the past 10 months, how many times have you heard someone say to you, whatever you're doing right now, things are going to change? And I think COVID-19 has certainly done that for many of us. Yet for some, it seems still that they're in this hangover phase, in the hope that things maybe just go back to normal over time. I think it's inevitable that the future of technology will continue to evolve with or without them. And things will transform and they will adapt. But the question still remains, what is the value to the end user? Or what is the value to the client when all this change comes about? If we look at the past 4 years, we've seen certain countries really driving these BIM standards, which is a drive in the positive direction. But if you can't define the value or you can't measure it, then what's the point? Remember, depending on what country you reside in, the culture as well as the policy making will always prevail above the rate of technology transformation. And it's easy to publish and dictate standards when you're sitting in the comfort of other policymakers as well as bureaucrats who are funding it. They say a picture paints 1,000 words. And there are numerous pictures at the moment flying around social media where we see an iceberg displaying BIM and how information management as well as the standards and the technology are seen within our industry. But the one thing that I don't see being addressed is the culture change. And that lies very much hidden under the deep waters of this iceberg. No matter what country or part of the world you live in, culture always prevails above all. And the one thing is that people don't enjoy change or instant change. Gradual change is imminent. And over time, these new technologies as well as the standards that are merging this physical, digital, or biological worlds in ways probably that are fundamentally transforming us as humankind. The extent to which these modifications become a positive one will depend on how we navigate the change. And maybe the opportunities will just rise along the way. And let's say you're just cruising along like you have in the past couple of years, doing what you've been doing and you've been doing it well. And then suddenly, everything just falls apart because the policymakers and the technology are driving new standards, forcing the technology vendors to change and make decisions without you. Now, the ironic part of this is that you're not doing anything different that you have been doing in the past. Yet you might even have a winning formula for your team on the projects, even for the company that you've developed and are driving forward in this transformational time. And that winning formula for your team or your project, suddenly it doesn't work for you anymore. And as the software and these machines start to improve their decision making and their processes are improved and there's better efficiencies, you're just carrying on. So then why are you doing it then? And while you're doing it, remember, these standards around the world, they just keep changing. And they get better and better. And so does the technology. Yet you might find yourself surrounded by a culture that's not yet ready to accept the change or has not implemented any transformational standards. So then the question is, what can you do about it? You need to start identifying what functions well and what doesn't function well in your working environment. And then make these changes slowly. But be very aware of this word slowly. Be ready to be prepared to adapt quickly when the changes come around that aren't so slow. If you don't have to stay abreast of all this tech that's entering our industry. And if you focus too much your attention towards social media or even the YouTube clips, it will engulf you, ready or not. If we seize the opportunity and avoid these pitfalls as we enter this fourth industrial revolution, we must consider carefully all the questions that it is going to raise. Each country needs to start rethinking its ideas about economic as well as its social development, its value creation, the privacy and the ownership, and even look at individual identity. We need to address these issues, and collectively we need to understand the moral as well as the ethical issues that are raised by this cutting-edge research that's being given to us through the technology advancements, which will then hopefully enable us to significantly extend the life of existing as well as new infrastructure, allowing us then maybe to adapt and approach and how we manage people at the same time and nurture those relationships. And if there's one really important thing or one value that lies within our industry right now, we need to address the fact that we will never be able to properly fund the digital aspirations of those who have not yet grasped the value of what we're actually trying to achieve. And in all my 30 years of industry experience, it's one of the hardest rules to learn, that if we are going to change, we need to keep 3 basic rules if we really truly want to see value in what we're doing. That first rule is always have the energy to keep moving forward with momentum. Second one is having the right mental insight, which means being able to adapt to different conditions as well as environments. And lastly, never lose your personal integrity. It's about alignment, and it's about what you say you're going to do and what you actually do. Ian Miskimon is our industry mentor for this week. And Ian is an industry spokesman, a communicator, as well as a speaker. He's also a thought leader and has been involved with various digital projects on various capital projects globally. Ian was also part of the UK BIM task group and formed part of the team for the Centre of Digital Built Britain.
From the beginning, BIM, and more recently digital twins, were designed to improve value. Value to the end user, value to the client, value to the delivery partners, value for all. Have we lost sight of this? Are we focusing too much on slavishly following standards, writing spreadsheets, creating 3D pretty pictures, or defining schemas rather than asking the question, how does this bring value to me, my organisation, my client, and their end users? I'm not saying that these activities don't bring value, but if you can't define that value, measure, monitor, and record it, how do we know there is actually value in it? And what is the most productive level to take it to? Whilst looking at whether there is value in something, it is worth stating that value isn't necessarily something that includes a pound sign. It comes from many areas such as environmental, societal, reputational, safety, and so many others that are difficult to quantify through simple numerical calculations. Over the last 15 years, I've been running an innovations program in the UK industry called Commit, which has been trying to bridge the gap between emerging technologies and the embedded change-averse culture in construction. One of the questions that I'm frequently asked is, we have this cool bit of technology and it's going to save lots of time and effort, but no one is willing to put their hands in their pockets to pay for it. Who do you think ought to be funding this innovation? And my response is always nearly the same. Follow the value. If nobody sees a value in your cool piece of technology, or you can't articulate that value to them, then perhaps you shouldn't be doing it. The same needs to be said of the data we create or collect to form our BIM models or digital twins. We're all guilty of getting distracted by shiny things that catch our eye. And who's to say that our own morale and enthusiasm, which is raised by having and using it, has no value to our organisation? And it is that soft value which is so difficult to quantify and measure, but I believe could be the key to the future of our society. Whether your focus is on value of BIM or digital twins, they both boil down to one key ingredient: data. These pieces of data have to be trusted and well managed, as well as being handled correctly, giving them meaning so that they become information, which, when given context, becomes knowledge, and finally, when applied to resolve a problem, task, decision, or answer a question, become wisdom. At each step, that data becomes more valuable to the user and the supplier. There is a great historical example of this through the work of Abraham Wald, a Hungarian Jewish statistician, what he did during the Second World War. Early in the conflict, it was noticed that many of the aircraft returning from missions over Nazi-occupied Europe had significant amount of bullet holes and damage in the wingtips, fuselage and tail. Scientists originally concluded that these were the areas that were being targeted by the enemy, and so therefore the most vulnerable and should be armour plated. This was an obvious but very erroneous conclusion. Abraham Wald pointed out the critical flaw in their analysis by looking at what raw data actually meant, giving it context and applying it, by which he markedly increased its value. Instead of looking where the holes were, he understood the meaning of this data, that those aircraft returning safely were not hit in the engines or cockpit, meaning that aircraft could take substantial damage in these areas and survive. Putting this into context, it was realised that those aircraft that were being shot down were most likely being hit in the cockpit and engines. Finally, applying this knowledge, they set about putting armour plating around the cockpit and engines, which greatly increased the survivability of the aircraft. This sequence has turned raw data into wisdom. This is a great example, but we need to delve further into that raw data. No matter how good it looks, the value of that data is based on whether we can find it amongst a huge volume presented to us on a daily basis, and when we do locate it, can we trust it? Or are we going to do some sort of time-consuming validation exercise? When we put this information into the context of buried services in the UK, it is estimated that around about £1 billion is lost to the economy every year due to not having trusted data on where underground pipes and cables are. This cost is through either delays of not trusting the data and having to hand dig trial pits to ascertain where and what the service is, or the disruption when the service is hit, causing leaks, explosions, or regional power outages. A great example of this was the Sydney Light Rail project, before which 500 known subsurface utilities were mapped for relocation. But during the construction, a further 400 were discovered, leading to delays on almost 1.5 years. This is just one data type, and there are many similar examples across all industries, all impacted because data wasn't procured, managed, trusted, or, put it more bluntly, valued by those who interacted with it. Data can also impact the market value of an organisation. In a recent study undertaken by Highways England, they calculated the value of their data at around about £60 billion. This is a significant amount when you consider the corporate organisation itself is valued at about £300 billion, and its tangible assets are around about £115 billion. Whilst they won't be selling this data, this really helped focus the business minds on how to better procure, manage and disseminate it. What was really interesting to me was the use of the black hole metaphor, which is a significant relevance when we are looking at those elusive soft values. This understands that we don't measure a black hole by observing it, as it reflects no light, but by measuring its impact on the things around it. In a recent article on the initiative, it was quoted that Highways England had identified £1.5 million of efficiencies that could be resolved using this black hole method. This study on existing data value is important, as no matter how good we get at procuring good quality data, if that is brought back into our business and mixed with poor quality data, it will devalue it and become worthless. It takes just one person in an organisation to have a bad data experience and declare that they are getting from the corporate system is at best tainted and at worst dangerous, and others will dismiss whatever is in the system and spend a significant time of their own creating, validating or squirreling away copies on their own machines. Therefore, what we need to do is to be both smart at procuring value and also valuing what we already have. Whether the data is for CapEx or OpEx needs, it needs to follow some basic rules for it to be valuable. In 2014, the Bank of England set out 5 dimensions for measuring quality in their data quality framework document, which are applicable to how we should value data. The first is relevance, which is the degree which the data needs or meets the needs of the end user. Whether that end user is part of the operational, the delivery partner or the consumer of the data, if that data isn't relevant to their needs, it has no value to them. On the flip side of this is if that data is exactly what they need to carry out the primary task and meet the company's objectives in an easy and efficient manner, then it could be exceedingly valuable. piece of data needs to be as accurate as it is needed to be by the end user. There is little value in having a sub-millimetre accurate laser scan of a stretch of blacktop on the highway. The more accurate you make something, the more it potentially costs to generate, verify, manage and distribute. If data is both relevant and accurate enough for the end user to carry out their primary task, then it's certainly worth more. The less I can rely on a piece of data to help me make good decisions, the less I value it. As the Gemini principles pointed out, trust has a significant value of its own. If I need to carry out a construction activity on a specific date, or I need to make a financial decision before a public inquiry, I will need the relevant, trustworthy data before that deadline, so it can help me. If it arrives late, then its value can be little or nothing. Comparability increases our understanding of the data in front of us and puts it into a context of either historical or intended values. For example, it lets us know if the data is within an acceptable range or whether it indicates a gradual degradation over time. This not only allows us to ensure our business is moving in the right direction to achieve its objectives, but also to ensure our assets are performing as designed. Comparability increases the value of data through context. If data isn't coherent and we struggle to understand it, the chances are we will ignore it and search elsewhere for an answer, or we will waste a large amount of time trying to work out what it means, leaving that data worth nothing. But no matter how relevant, accurate, punctual, comparable or coherent that data, if it's not accessible to the end user at the time they need to utilise it, then it might as well not be there at all. Alongside this, the data needs to be presented in an unambiguous way that supports and promotes any associated data. We also need to consider the human dimension. When considering data for our BIM and digital twin models, we can be forgiving for concentrating our efforts on what has been generated by technology, be it hardware or software. This does, however, miss out a large volume produced by humans. Whether this is exchanged in a digital way or simply by physically talking to each other. When dealing with human-generated data, we must keep in mind how it can be verified as true. In recent history, much has been made of false news delivered over social media platforms to be deliberately misleading or influence the population, who might not know any better, to a wrong conclusion. This can be done for many reasons, not many of them good for society. To this end, to ensure that human-generated data is valuable to its consumer, we should take into consideration its provenance, its source, the date it was created, the location it was created, and the motivation, the reason why it was created in the first place. To move forward in the digital revolution, we must get better at understanding the value of data and how to increase its value through trust, purpose, and function. Organisations of all types at every level must get better at procuring data at the right cost and ensuring it isn't devalued through poor management, handling, or understanding. Without this, we will never be able to properly fund the digital aspirations and move on to the next phase.